I don't consider Valve to be a monopoly. If that's all you wanted to know, you can click off now. Perhaps click the subscribe button before you pass go and collect your $200, or at least check out one of my other videos. But for the rest of the video, I want to discuss why Valve keeps getting that label thrown at them, why I don't think that they are a monopoly, and what I would like to see Valve change, because while I don't think that they're a monopoly, they certainly aren't perfect, and they do have a lot of power in the industry. And speaking of power, a part of this video is sponsored by UGREEN, one of the best ways to keep your stuff topped off. Whenever I need to charge anything, I always reach for a UGREEN product. Whenever I'm at home, I always use UGREEN's Nexode chargers. This is the UGREEN Nexode 100-watt charger. You can connect a single device for up to 100 watts of power and charge the MacBook Air M2 to 55% in less than 30 minutes. Or if you have multiple devices, you can provide fast charge to up to 4 devices at the same time, including Steam Decks, ROG Ally X, and more. They're small, they're lightweight, and they keep your tech topped off. But it won't do you any good if you're not near an outlet. When that happens, I like to use their 145-watt 25,000 milliamp hour battery bank in order to charge my stuff. Thanks to the latest PD 3.1 and QC 3.0 tech, UGREEN's power bank charges things fast. It can charge a MacBook Pro 16 up to 56% in just 30 minutes. It can fast charge 3 devices at once, or if you stick to just one device, it can charge that device over and over and over again thanks to the massive 25,000 milliamp hour capacity. So if you want to keep your tech topped off in any situation, use the links below that like button in order to check out all of the UGREEN Prime Day deals, which go up to 41% off. There are simple answers to this question as well as more complex answers, but before I get into why Valve gets called a monopoly, let me know why you think they do in the comment section down below that like button. Let's start with the simple answer. They are the biggest player in the PC gaming market. No one comes even close to Valve. For example, there are lots of different metrics that you can use in order to look at Steam success. One would be concurrent users. Check out this graph from SteamDB. It shows that Valve's concurrent users ebbs and flows, but the trend is ever upward, with peak concurrent users hitting an all-time high just 10 days ago at nearly 37 million people. And I'm going to bet that that record will be eclipsed by Steam yet again in short order. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if by the time you see this, that record is broken again. But those are the people that just happen to have Steam open. Right now, if you check for people that are actively playing a game on Steam, you can see we're again at an all-time high. Though I will say, this doesn't go back as far as the last graph. I think they only started tracking people in game about 6 years ago. But still, the time that I'm writing this, there are 11.6 million people playing a game right now on Steam, and it's 11:27 a.m. on a Tuesday. That is impressive. Let's compare this with Valve's biggest rival store on the PC, the Epic Games Store. According to this blog post over at Epic Games, their daily active users peaked at 36.1 million, which sounds fairly comparable to Valve's number. But what you have to realize is that is 2 very different numbers. You see, Valve's 37 million number, that's the number of people that are playing or at least logged in at the same time, while the Epic Games Store they're talking about how many log in throughout the day. In order to get a like-for-like comparison, the best information I can find right now is back in 2021, Valve had 69 million daily active users. At the same time, their peak concurrent players was 27.4 million. So if we do a little bit of math, we can see that Valve's peak concurrent increased from 27.4 million up to 36.9 million, which will round that to about 10 million. That's an increase of about 36%. If we assume that 36% increase in daily concurrence also translates to a similar increase in daily active users, that would put Valve at roughly 49.7 million daily active users compared to Epic Games Store's 37 million. If we dip into the console space, Sony has only sold about 50 million PS5s so far. Valve clearly has market dominance, and some would say they have a monopoly as well. Okay, we've established that Valve is the big guns when it comes to PC gaming. That isn't going to surprise anybody. If I went to a gaming convention and I asked random people, what store they think of when they think about PC gaming, a vast majority of them would say Steam. And when companies want to put their games on Steam, they have to follow Valve's rules. And sometimes they don't like those rules. Rules like you have to pay 30% of the income that you make from Steam to Valve. Why do devs have to give so much to Valve? I will get to that in a second. But first, I want to focus on that 30% number because that number is actually pretty misleading. You see, Valve takes 30% on sales under $10 million. A 25% cut on sales from $10 to $50 million, and a 20% cut on sales above $50 million. Basically, the way it works out is the more money that your game makes, the less that you will have to pay to Valve. This does make a lot of sense because Valve can look at the games that are bringing in a lot of money and they can say, those games are popular, players are coming to Steam because of that game and buying it. We have less of an impact on this particular game's success, so we will take less of a cut. I do think that that's a good change, but it isn't perfect. And stick around until the end of the video because there's a significant change that I would like to see happen here that would benefit these smaller players in this particular industry. Valve sets other rules to be on their store as well. And if you don't do what they say, then your game won't be on their store. Though I would say their rules are fairly loose and easy compared to, say, console makers, but some of those rules get lawsuits. For instance, recently Valve was sued for nearly $840 million. They claim, the people suing Valve, claim that Valve uses market dominance, which they do have, to overcharge users. Basically, Valve has a rule that says that you can't charge less for a Steam key on some other website than you do on Steam. So if Valve gives a publisher a Steam key, which they do for free, by the way, the publisher can't then turn around and say the price is $60 on Steam, but if you buy it from us, it's only $40. Basically, Valve is saying, look, we're giving you a Steam key for free. Don't screw us over, please and thank you, which makes 100% sense to me. Think of it this way. If they charge less on some other website, they still have to support that game because it was bought using a Steam key. So that means there's download costs, there's support costs. They're going to be the ones who are intercepting your returns and stuff like that. And so I do understand why Valve has this rule. However, if Valve is saying don't put your game on the Epic Games Store, for instance, for cheaper than you do on Steam, or we will remove you, well, that's a totally different argument than what I talked about before. I bring this up because in this lawsuit, there's an email from, and hopefully I get this right, Tom Giardino, where he's responding to a question about pricing from a dev. He said, quote, "You're free to price however you want, but we always wish to provide our customers with a fair deal and the best possible price. So if you wanted to disadvantage Steam customers by charging them a higher price, we would opt to not sell your game on the store. We want to make sure that Steam users aren't getting a worse deal." End quote. Now, to be fair, there isn't anything in this email that explains if they are talking about another store like the Epic Games Store, which doesn't use Steam keys, or if they're talking about other sites that do use Steam keys. Now, if it's the former, Valve shouldn't be doing that, and I would agree that that is absolutely anti-competitive behavior. If it's the latter, then I'm fine with it. But if you want to really look at anti-competitive behavior, Valve doesn't pay devs and publishers for exclusivity like some other stores do. Yes, the Epic Games Store is smaller compared to Steam, but Epic Games is not a small company. They got that Fortnite money, they got deep wallets, and they try and compete with Steam by flexing those monetary muscles rather than making their store better. That 12% cut that they take, well, if it's your first game on their store and you make it exclusive for 6 months, you get to keep all of it. After that, it's back to the 88-12 split. Epic can get away with this because they aren't market dominant and Valve is. If the positions were reversed, I have no doubt that Valve would do something like this as well. I'm really glad that they don't, because when you ask me, exclusives are almost always bad for the end user. Everything I just said explains why people might think of Valve as a monopoly, but I personally don't, and here's why. There are lots of other stores where we can buy PC video games. It doesn't matter if they're successful. They exist, but most users don't use them, and Valve isn't stopping us from using them. Valve isn't stopping them from being successful. We are stopping them from being successful. We are choosing to shop on Steam over other places, and there's lots of them. There's the previously mentioned Epic Games Store, there's GOG, itch.io, Microsoft has a store, Green Man Gaming, and that's just to name a few. Plus, the PC is an open platform. You can install anything you want on your computer. You don't have to go to one of these stores. If tomorrow I decide to make a game and I make that game only available on my website, I can do that, and you could buy it and you could install it, and there's nothing Valve or anyone else could do to stop us. Back to the Epic Games Store. I don't really use it that much. I've never really cared for it. I've claimed the games. I used to have an alarm that would remind me to claim my games, and you know why I needed an alarm? Because I didn't use Epic Games Store. You know, I consistently would get the alarm, claim my free games, close it down, and never play them. Eventually, I just stopped doing that because it felt like a giant waste of my time. I won't say that my experience with the Epic Games Store is typical, but anecdotally, the people that I've talked to, most of them have had basically the same experience. I wonder how many of that 37 million daily active users are only logging into the Epic Games Store to claim the free games that they never play. How many are actually playing games on Epic Games that aren't Fortnite? I know it isn't me, but I also don't hate the Epic Games Store like a lot of people do. It's pretty weak on features, and there's a reason. That's really the reason it doesn't get used by me. Not because Valve is a monopoly, but because Valve is just better at this. If the Epic Games Store were better, then I would probably use it way more often. So there's other stores, hence Valve isn't a monopoly, right? Well, not according to some. A good example of this would be Microsoft and Internet Explorer. For the younger people out there who are watching this, let me explain. And if you're old like me, don't skip ahead. Stick around, see if I get stuff right, correct me if I don't. First of all, keep in mind, this is not a perfect analogy, and I'm not saying it is. I'm keeping it simple. Back in the late 90s, Microsoft had a browser called Internet Explorer. It came with Windows. People that were making competing browsers didn't really like that Windows was shipping with a built-in browser. They wanted their browsers to be installed on Windows alongside Internet Explorer, or as I called it back when I worked tech support, the Big Blue E. At one point, Microsoft even tried to get Netscape to stop developing their browser for Windows so that they could carve up the market into Windows and non-Windows as a market. Now, you could say in this case that Microsoft was dominant, but there were other operating systems available like Linux and Unix and Mac OS. They were not very popular, but there was competition. So how could Microsoft be a monopoly? Well, spoilers, Microsoft lost that case. So I could see Valve losing a lawsuit like this one, even if I don't necessarily agree with the lawsuit that's being brought against them now. That doesn't mean that at some point, some court won't say, you know what, you're right, Valve is too powerful, we need to knock them down a peg. But the real reason that I don't think of Valve as a monopoly, it has to do with the pressure from other stores and how Valve has reacted to that pressure. Remember that 30% we talked about earlier? Well, it used to be true that Valve would take 30 cents of every dollar that was earned on Steam. But then Epic Games showed up and they set their price at 12%. Shortly after that, Microsoft changed their price structure to 12%. Once that happened, Valve responded by changing their fee structure to have the one that we have now, the one that changes depending on how much money a game is actually earning. If Valve were actually a monopoly, they wouldn't feel the pressure, they wouldn't feel the need to react to these other stores. They could simply ignore them and keep the price exactly where they had it, especially since Valve is a privately run company, so they're not going to have any public shareholders to answer to. I'd argue that if Valve were a monopoly, they would still be sitting on that 30% pricing structure, which, by the way, is the same cut that Apple takes. It is the same cut that Google takes. It's almost an industry standard. Another reason lawsuits like this don't make a lot of sense to me is the fact that Valve doesn't set the prices. Prices are determined by the publisher. This particular lawsuit alleges that Valve is overcharging, but Valve didn't pick what prices to sell the games at. They do, however, have rules as to how often publishers can change those prices. They do this in order to keep publishers from gaming the system. So while Valve does have market dominance, and sometimes they do flex their muscles in order to protect their bottom line, until we see real information to the contrary, I don't see Valve as a monopoly. So if I don't think Valve's a monopoly, then why is it that no one else seems to be able to compete with them? Well, Valve didn't start out as the powerhouse. In fact, when Valve first launched Steam alongside Half-Life 2, it was pretty universally disliked. But what they did, what other companies seem to be unable or unwilling to do. They focused on the user experience, they iterated and improved until they got to where they are today. Right now, the main competition with Steam, they try to compete with Steam by throwing money at the problem via exclusives. Exclusives just tend to piss off PC users, or at least they piss me off. That's why when games that are exclusive to other stores finally do come to Steam, a bunch of PC users are like, finally, this is on PC. But hey, it's been on PC for ages. Kingdom Hearts is a great example of this. If these companies want to make their store compete with Steam, they need to, number one, make it better for developers. Some would argue that they did that with the 88-12 split, or the 100% split if you're exclusive for 6 months. And sure, that is a better cut. But I've got some math for you. 88% of nothing is still nothing. 100% of nothing is still nothing. And if you're not on Steam, you are ignoring a huge swath of the gaming community. That's a lot of wallets you are unable to reach into. So putting your game on these other stores, yes, gets you a better cut, but a better cut of nothing is still nothing. Devs putting their games exclusively on the Epic Games Store for 6 months, all they're doing is really pissing off their fans. And then when they do release the game on Steam 6 months later, a lot of times people look at the game and they say, this is 6 months old. You better not try and sell it to me at full price. I was going to call exclusivity a double-edged sword, but I don't think that that's a good enough description here. It's like a double-edged sword, you know, it cuts both ways, but it has a handle, right? Right now, the way that PC gamers react to exclusivity is like a double-edged sword without a handle. So you have to hold on to the blade to fight. Not a great move. That doesn't mean that some devs haven't seen success with the Epic Games Store. That doesn't mean that the Epic Games Store won't gain ground at some point. All of their numbers seem to be trending in an upward direction as well. So in a few years, perhaps, this will be a very different conversation. But the other thing that stores need to do in order to compete is make the user experience better. Like I said at the beginning, I don't use the Epic Games Store very often, but it's my experience, it's my understanding that the store and the app are pretty much very bare bones. In the meantime, Valve is constantly updating Steam in order to improve it. It certainly isn't perfect, but a slightly imperfect analog for this is it's like a marathon. Valve is on mile 20, and everyone else seems to still be on like mile 4. Everyone has work to do, but Valve's just been at this longer. And can the others catch up? I'd say it depends on what they do and how Valve responds to it. One thing I'd like to see Valve do is make another change to that pricing structure that I mentioned earlier in the video. Valve takes 30% from anyone under $10 million, and as the games make more money, they take less and less. When I first read this, I felt like it was Valve sticking it to the little guys. You know, the smallest devs with the fewest resources are getting pinged for way more than the big guys. That sucks. I'd like to see Valve find a way to help the smaller studios a bit. For example, and these are just some numbers that I'm throwing around, there could be lots of good reasons that I haven't thought of as to why this is a bad idea. But what if Valve were to say, we'll match Microsoft and Epic Games Store at 12% cut until your game hits $1 million in sales. Then the cut increases to 20% until you hit $5 million in sales. From 5 to 10 million, you're at 30%, and then the current pricing scheme kicks in after that. I think that this, leaves the big end alive the way it is now, but it also gives a little bit more incentive for smaller devs to bring their game to Valve. Not that they really need more incentive to bring their games to Steam, but it makes it a little easier for those smaller devs to succeed on Steam, if that makes sense. I'd also like to see Valve use their cut to incentivize publishers to stop doing things like, de novo DRM or third-party launchers. This would be a huge benefit to Steam Deck users, and when Valve inevitably releases a new Steam machine without a screen, it will benefit them as well. Not only that, but I don't think anyone really likes these things. So even if people aren't on gaming on Steam OS, they'll have a bonus of clicking a game and it launching without any extra nonsense. That's a win. It's a triple win, the most rare of all wins. I don't think Valve is perfect, but I also don't think that they're a monopoly. But if they are doing anti-consumer things, that is not okay. There needs to be some nuance when discussing this stuff. It seems impossible to say anything bad about Valve because you'll instantly get 1 million people coming after you saying, leave them alone. But they are not perfect. No company is. And constantly trying to shield Valve from any type of criticism doesn't help them get better. They aren't perfect. They aren't your friend. No company is your friend. But of all of the companies out there, I personally have the fewest reservations about Valve because they seem to understand that more than anybody else, that if you put the customer first, they will show up over and over and over. And that is a winning formula for making lots of money. And because of this sentiment, which seems to be shared by a large portion of gamers, the gamers always tend to try and stand up for Valve because Valve feels like they're standing up for us. Sure, Valve could do some shitty things to make a quick buck, but they seem to be one of the few companies that understand that a quick buck now might mean fewer bucks later. And that's what other stores need to understand if they're going to give Valve a run for their proverbial money. Of course, Epic has that Fortnite cash, so maybe they can just outspend Valve enough to win. It's possible, but I have my doubts. From the NerdNest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.